Sometimes life puts us in situations where one decision can change everything. This is the story of an unexpected friendship between a man and a wild Mustang, a bond forged through courage, trust, and second chances. Nathan was a wildlife rescuer who lived on the outskirts of a vast wilderness. He had always loved nature and spent his days helping animals in need. One evening, while walking along the riverbank, he heard a sound that sent chills down his spine, a desperate, high-pitched neighing echoing through the valley. He sprinted toward the sound, his heart pounding. As he reached the river, his worst fears were confirmed. A baby Mustang was struggling in the violent current, its frail body being tossed around by the raging water. It was alone, terrified, and on the verge of drowning. Nathan had no time to think. He knew that if he hesitated, the foal would be swept away forever. He threw off his jacket, took a deep breath, and dove into the freezing water. The current was strong, stronger than he had expected. The icy water stung his skin, but he fought through it, pushing forward toward the Mustang. The foal's eyes were wide with terror. It thrashed against the waves, unaware that help had arrived. Nathan reached out, grabbing the foal's body. But the Mustang, driven by pure survival instinct, kicked wildly, almost knocking him back. He tightened his grip, trying to keep its head above water. The river, however, wasn't ready to let them go so easily. Nathan could feel the force of the river pulling him down, trying to separate him from the Mustang. Every movement felt like a battle against nature itself. The foal, panicked and exhausted, continued to resist his grip, but Nathan held on tighter. "Hold on, little one," he gasped, his breath coming in short bursts. He knew he couldn't let go. Not now. With every ounce of strength, he kicked his legs, pushing toward the shore. But the river's current was unrelenting. Water splashed into his face, blurring his vision. His muscles screamed in protest, but he refused to give up. The foal's movements were slowing down. It was getting weaker. Nathan's mind raced. He couldn't let this happen. Summoning one last burst of energy, he pulled the Mustang closer, using his other arm to propel himself forward. Inch by inch, they moved toward safety. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Nathan's feet touched solid ground. With one last push, he dragged the foal onto the muddy riverbank. Both of them collapsed, gasping for breath. The foal coughed, its tiny body shivering. It was alive, but barely. Nathan sat up, wiping the water from his face. Relief washed over him, but then he noticed something. The foal was staring at him, fear still lingering in its eyes. Despite being saved, it didn't trust him. The foal stood on shaky legs, backing away from Nathan. Its breathing was ragged, its body trembling from exhaustion and fear. Nathan understood. This was a wild animal. It had never known human touch before. "Hey, it's okay," Nathan said softly, keeping his distance. "You're safe now." But the foal didn't believe him. It took a few unsteady steps back, its eyes darting around for an escape. Nathan sighed. He needed to approach this the right way. If he moved too fast, he could scare the foal even more. So he simply sat down, making himself seem as non-threatening as possible. The Mustang continued to watch him, its ears twitching at every small sound. The river roared behind them, a reminder of the danger it had just escaped. Nathan reached into his backpack, pulling out a small cloth. He wrung out the water, then placed it beside him. He made sure to keep his hands open, palms up, a universal sign of peace. Minutes passed. The foal didn't move, but its breathing slowed. Finally, after what felt like hours, it took one hesitant step forward. Nathan didn't move. He let the Mustang come to him, knowing this moment was critical. If he gained its trust now, everything would change. And then it happened. The foal lowered its head and nudged his outstretched hand. Nathan smiled. A silent bond had just been formed. Nathan knew he couldn't rush the process. The foal, though weak, was still full of fear. Any sudden movement could send it running. He stayed still, his voice calm and reassuring. "You're okay now," he whispered. The foal's ears twitched, its tiny body shivering from the cold. Nathan reached into his backpack and pulled out a small blanket. He placed it in front of him, not forcing anything. Minutes passed. Finally, the foal took a hesitant step forward, then another. It nudged the blanket, curious yet cautious. Nathan held his breath. And then, it happened. The foal nudged his arm. A bond had been formed. Nathan knew the foal couldn't survive alone. It was too young, too weak. He made a decision. He would take care of it until it was strong enough to return to the wild. Gently, he scooped the foal into his arms. It tensed at first, but exhaustion won. By the time they reached his truck, the Mustang was asleep against his chest. Back at his ranch, Nathan set up a safe space in the barn. Fresh hay, warm blankets, and a small feeding bottle. The foal needed nourishment and care. For the first few days, Spirit barely moved. It would flinch at every noise, still wary of its new surroundings. Nathan never forced it to do anything. Instead, he simply showed up. He sat nearby, letting Spirit get used to his presence. Then one morning, something changed. Nathan entered the barn, and instead of shrinking away, Spirit took a step toward him. A tiny step, but it meant everything. Their bond had deepened. Spirit no longer saw him as a threat, but as a friend. Weeks passed, and Spirit grew stronger. Nathan fed it every day, watched it learn how to run, and even taught it to respond to his voice. But something was clear. Spirit was still wild at heart. One morning, Nathan opened the barn doors to let Spirit explore the fenced area outside. The young Mustang hesitated at first, looking back at Nathan for reassurance. "Go on," Nathan encouraged, giving it space. Then in a blur of movement, Spirit took off. Nathan watched in awe as the foal ran across the field, its legs stretching out, its muscles rippling. It wasn't just running, it was flying. That's when Nathan knew. No matter how much Spirit loved him, it didn't belong in a barn. It belonged in the wild, where it could be free. Nathan sighed, his heart heavy. He had saved Spirit's life, but now he had to make the hardest decision of all. He had to let Spirit go. Nathan had made up his mind. It was time. Spirit had grown into a strong, beautiful Mustang. It no longer needed his protection. But letting go was easier said than done. That evening, Nathan walked over to Spirit, who was nibbling on some grass. The young Mustang lifted its head and trotted over, nudging Nathan's shoulder. He smiled sadly. "You're ready, aren't you?" Spirit flicked its tail, as if answering him. Nathan had already scouted an area where wild Mustangs roamed. It was deep in the wilderness, far from roads and human interference, a place where Spirit could be safe and truly free. The next morning, he loaded Spirit into the trailer and drove for miles. The closer they got, the more his chest tightened. He had been dreading this moment. Finally, he arrived at the open valley where a herd of Mustangs grazed. Their powerful bodies moved like shadows against the rolling hills. Nathan stepped out and opened the trailer gate. Spirit hesitated. It turned its head, looking back at him. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Nathan whispered, "Go!" Spirit blinked. Then, in a single motion, it bolted out of the trailer. Nathan watched as Spirit ran toward the wild Mustangs. His heart ached, but he knew. He had done the right thing. Spirit was home. Nathan stood motionless, watching as Spirit galloped toward the herd of wild Mustangs. The wind carried the rhythmic pounding of hooves, a sound both powerful and bittersweet. He had spent months caring for Spirit, teaching it, protecting it, and now it was leaving. Spirit slowed as it neared the herd. The other Mustangs lifted their heads, their ears flicking as they studied the newcomer. A large stallion stepped forward, its dark coat shimmering in the sunlight. Nathan held his breath. This was the test. Would they accept Spirit? The stallion snorted, lowering its head slightly. Spirit hesitated, then took a tentative step forward. Another Mustang, a young mare, trotted closer and nudged Spirit's neck. Then, as if sensing no danger, the herd returned to grazing. Spirit had been accepted. Nathan exhaled a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. He should have felt relief. Instead, a hollow ache settled in his chest. Spirit lifted its head and looked back, straight at Nathan. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, with one last flick of its tail, Spirit turned and disappeared into the herd. Nathan smiled sadly. "Goodbye, buddy." He turned, walking back toward his truck. The sky was vast, the wind cool against his face. He had done what was right, even if it hurt, because true love is about letting go. Nathan drove home in silence. The empty trailer behind him felt heavier than ever. He had expected to feel proud. After all, he had saved Spirit's life and given it a second chance. But all he felt was emptiness. For months, Spirit had been his shadow. Now the barn was quiet. too quiet. That night, Nathan stood at the fence staring at the moonlit fields. Had Spirit already forgotten him? A part of him wanted to drive back to the valley, just to catch one last glimpse. But he knew better. Spirit belonged there now. A soft sigh escaped his lips. Guess it was never really mine to keep. As the days passed, Nathan found himself listening for hoofbeats that never came. His hands missed the familiar nudge of Spirit's nose, the way the Mustang would follow him around like a loyal companion. Letting go had been the right thing to do, but no one warns you how much it hurts. Still, Nathan knew one thing. Some bonds never break, no matter how far apart you are. A few weeks had passed since Nathan let Spirit go. Life had returned to normal, or at least that's what he told himself. One morning, he was out checking the fence when something made him stop. A single hoof print in the dirt. Nathan's heart pounded. He knelt down, running his fingers over the fresh mark. It was too small to belong to a full-grown Mustang. It couldn't be. A sudden gust of wind rustled the trees. Nathan lifted his head, scanning the horizon. At first, he saw nothing but rolling fields. Then, a shadow moved. His breath caught. There, standing on a distant hill, was Spirit. The young Mustang stood tall, its mane flowing in the breeze. It was stronger now, more confident. Wilder. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then in one swift motion, Spirit reared up, letting out a powerful neigh. It was a farewell, a thank you. Nathan's eyes burned, but he smiled. And just like that, Spirit turned and galloped away, back to the wild where it truly belonged. Nathan placed a hand on his chest, feeling his heart race. Spirit was gone, but a part of him would always remain, because some bonds never break. Hope you guys like the story of love and sacrifice, so hit the bell icon, subscribe the channel, like the video. Stay tuned for next video.